My name is Sarah Rosenkrantz, not to be confused with our wonderful presenters, who is also Sarah, and I am the Exhibits and Education Assistant at IU's Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology. Um, Welcome to our Coffee and Curator event. If this is your first time at one of these events, just to let you know how it'll go, there'll be a short 10-minute presentation followed by a 10-minute Q&A, and you can ask our wonderful presenters anything you would like, and they will try their best to answer. As you think of questions, you can put them in the chat, and I'll read them off at the end, or you can ask them yourself at the very end. And before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that IUMAA and IU Bloomington is on the traditional homelands of the Miami, Shawnee, Potawatomi, and Delaware. We encourage you, to look them up. They have wonderful musical traditions, as well as many other wonderful traditions. And we also encourage you to look up Native Indigenous people in your own area. And without further ado, I'll introduce our presenters. Sarah Junk Hatcher is the head of programs and education here at IUMAA. And Allison McClanahan is the collections and cataloging librarian at the Archives of Traditional Music, also at IU. And she is in charge of managing public and technical services. So welcome, Sarah and Allison.
Thanks, Sarah. And thank all of you for being with us today. Hopefully this is a fun and entertaining way to spend just a little bit of your afternoon. As Sarah just noted, I am not an ethnomusicologist. I am the museum's educator. And for the last 11 years, I've had the privilege of giving well over 300 tours that involved our musical instrument collection. And it is one of my very favorites. So I'm very glad to be able to share part of it with you today. To start out with, I will kind of set the stage here. This slide gives a brief overview of a handful of collections that are held by the museum that also have complementing collections at the Archives of Traditional Music. We're going to focus on the Hornbostel and Herzog collections, the Archives of Traditional Music transfer, and collections made by Laura Bolton, Barbara and Ellen Miriam, Terrence Beck, and if we have time, we'll talk about Ted and Charlotte Frisbee. As I was preparing for this, it became extremely apparent that it would be irresponsible to discuss our instruments without also inviting Allison to be part of this presentation, because so many of the collections she works with really help inform what we know about our instruments. And so thank you, Allison, for being with us today. Could you tell our audience just a little bit about the ATM?
Absolutely. So for those of you who might not be familiar with the Archives of Traditional Music, or the ATM, even though we don't give out money, we like to shorten it. We started as a research collection by George Herzog in the late 1930s. And from that time, we've become one of the largest university-based ethnographic audiovisual archives in the United States. We have an international scope that covers disciplines of folklore, anthropology, linguistics, music, area studies, early popular music, ethnomusicology. And because of that international scope, we have over 300 languages represented in our holdings. So being a very large archive, we have over 115,000 audiovisual recordings, as well as photographs, manuscripts, field notes, transcriptions, translations, ephemera, and other accompanying print material. So that's kind of the fast facts, but if you want to know more, you're more than welcome to reach out or check out our website.
Thank you. And you'll see as we move forward that we have a lot of points where our collections intersect, and we're discovering more every time we sit down and talk. So this is just the tip of the iceberg, and you can expect there will be more from the two of us in future months. So the first collection is the Hornbostel and Herzog collection. The gentleman whose picture is on the right, the gentleman with the lovely beard there, is Erich von Hornbostel, and he was an early ethnomusicologist. He was from Austria and was both an ethnologist and a musicologist, and is considered one of the people who helped develop the field of comparative music. One of the things that he is best known for around the museum is working with Kurt Sachs to develop the Hornbostel Sachs or Sachs Hornbostel classification system. As good museum people, we love ways to classify things, so we're grateful to him for that work. He is also known for being a mentor to George Herzog, who Allison will tell you about.
Yeah. So George Herzog was the ATM's founder and was a Hungarian-born scholar. He did a lot of things, but he blended the disciplines of anthropology, linguistics, and music into what would become known as comparative musicology and ethnomusicology. So as Sarah mentioned, in the early 1920s, he served as an assistant to von Hornbostel at the Berlin Phonogram Archive. And then in the 1930s, Herzog studied with Franz Boas at Columbia University, where he began assembling that personal collection of recordings that would eventually become the foundation for the ATM's collections. So Herzog really kind of had a lot of people mentoring him that were very large and well-known scholars in these fields. So in 1948, Herzog joined the IU anthropology faculty, and he brought that collection, which at that time was nearly 10,000 recordings, from his own research, as well as from scholars and collectors and even other institutions that he had managed to collect that were made throughout the late 19th and early 20th century. So there are over 40 field collections made by Herzog in ATM's holdings. And there's also an extensive collection of Herzog's papers, which also happen to include some papers and slip files that he got from Hornbostel.
Yeah, and one of the points of future research is to start correlating the recordings that are part of the ATM holdings with the particular instruments that are in the IUMAA collections. We would be here all day if we went through all of the instruments in all of these collections, so I just picked a few from each set that we'll be talking about. So some of the instruments that are part of this particular collection are things like this lovely bowed lute from China. One of our most popular is this lyre from Estonia. And you'll notice as we go through that in some instances, we have the names of the instruments in their native language. In many, many instances, there are multiple correct spellings or acceptable spellings for these words. So if you find something that is spelled in a way that you're not accustomed to, definitely let me know, but it might be that there's multiple acceptable spellings. Herzog was a noted authority on Native American music. And one of the lovely pieces in this collection is a rattle from the Menominee people who call Wisconsin home. The next collection that we wanted to touch on is from a set of materials that the ATM transferred to the museum in 1966. Allison noted that their collection is really focused on the sound recordings and documents that go to support them. And so we house the instruments themselves that many of these scholars collected as part of their field work. One of them is this relatively familiar and contemporary penny whistle from Great Britain. Other instruments are from a little bit further afield and are less known to Western audiences. Things like the sheng, which is pictured in the bottom photograph here. It's a mouth organ from China. And then on top is one of our Brazilian panpipes that the two of them donated. Lest you think that everything they gave us is a woodwind, I had to include something that wasn't a woodwind. So this is a lamellophone from Africa. Moving to another collection, you'll see here this wonderful photograph of body musicians and dancers sitting together. This photo was taken by Terrence Beck, who Allison is going to tell us about in just a moment. And I thank the ATM for letting us use this photo here.
Yeah. So Terrence Beck first visited Nepal as a Peace Corps volunteer in 1964. And so over the next several years, he traveled over 9,000 miles, which is incredible to me, across Nepal. And while he was trekking across Nepal, he actually simultaneously made recordings on an open reel tape machine, which total over 260 hours of performances and oral histories, life histories. And then the collection at the ATM then has also musical transcriptions and transcriptions of those oral histories, thousands of song texts, as well as the accompanying field notes. And in addition to the recordings, Beck also took photographs, such as this one on the slide. So there are nearly 1,500 photos in that collection as well. So it is a very large collection and body of material that part is at the ATM, and then the instruments have been given to IUMAA.
And
sorry, and I'm going to put a link in the chat to a collection highlight for the Beck collection if anybody is interested.
And some of the materials are also available in the Wells Library as far as being able to do a little bit of research here. But of the 227 items that he donated to the museum, 169 of them were instruments. And this is by far one of the favorites for most people. It's called a nagfani. And if you look carefully at the bell, you'll see a dragon's head, which is perhaps why it's so popular. And this instrument, as well as the gong here, are both associated with Tibetan Buddhism. And both of these instruments have secular and sacred uses. So they really have a lot of interesting information that we can learn about through them. The next collection that I would like to talk about is the one that I assumed that ATM had reams and reams and reams of paper about when I went over to talk with Allison, because it is our largest subset of instruments. In the Laura Bolton collection, there are more than 390 items. And as you can see in this photograph, which the woman there is Laura Bolton, these instruments were collected and used for talks and films and other educational purposes. Laura is quite the interesting lady. She does have an autobiography called The Music Hunter, and it is widely available. So I encourage you to check that out if we've piqued your interest. She was most interested in collecting what she called the music of the people. So you won't find what we would consider classical music in her recordings or amongst the instruments. It's really a lot more everyday instruments. I want to just point out the size of the instrument sitting on the floor next to that gentleman, because it will appear in the next slide. And I want you to just kind of think about the scale of this. So that is the slit drum portrayed in the previous image. It's quite large, and it comes to us from Angola. Laura also collected some really key instruments that are in our collection. Haiti experienced a lot of cultural shift in the 1930s, and we have some very unique Haitian drums as a result of her collecting. And part of what makes them so important is the information that accompanies them in the ATM's holdings.
So Sarah was not wrong when she said the Laura Bolton collection is very large, and it's very large for your instrument collection and also for our collections. So the ATM holds the Laura Bolton papers, the Laura Bolton Foundation papers collection, which totals over 170 boxes of correspondence, research notes, newspaper clippings, and ephemera. Her collected library, so she would go around to all of these places and would also pick up like books and journals and things. There's descriptive notes for the recordings, as well as information relating to her instrument collection. So we have a lot of work to do with this collection, and I think there's good fodder for further collaboration. There's also drafts for publications such as journal articles, her autobiography, liner notes, TV and radio programs, and documentary films, as well as some personal materials. So we did finish a finding aid for the paper collection at the ATM, and I'll put a link to that finding aid in the chat too, if anybody's interested in looking through that.
And you may have noticed that Allison and I keep noting the research potential here. So we hope that you pick up on that thread and tug on it a little bit at the end, and we'll provide our contact information so that you can get in touch with us. So the Haitian drums that Bolton collected are very key, but they are not the only Haitian drums in our collection. We have some others that were collected by Alan Merriam. Dr. Merriam is another kind of legend in the field of ethnomusicology, and he studied under Melvin Herskovitz at Northwestern and then came to IU in 1962. He's the author of one of the key books in ethnomusicology, The Anthropology of Music. And he really advocated for not just thinking about music as something that was in culture, but music as culture. And sadly, he died in 1980. So his work was probably not as robust as it would have been if not for that terrible plane accident. So the Haitian drum that is in our collection is this one here. And in addition to this, his donations to the museum include sheet music, xylophones and flutes from Africa, and a body of work that was deposited at the ATM, which Allison is going to tell us about.
Yeah, and I know we're running a short on time, so I'll be brief. So the ATM holds 5 field collections made by Alan and Barbara Merriam, recorded throughout the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Rwanda, Burundi, the United States, and Cuba, and even more where Merriam is featured as a speaker or an interviewee or the subject of the recordings. And we do have a highlight page for one of the Merriam's collections recorded in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which actually includes audio excerpts from the recordings. And I'll put a link to that in the chat as well.
Thanks, Allison. So the last collector, and we'll just kind of skim over this fantastic pair of academics, are Charlotte and Ted Frisbee, who were longtime faculty members at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. And a lot of their focus was on the Southwest, but they also collected instruments from around the world. And they have a collection of papers and other materials at the ATM that is in the process of being cataloged and processed. So this Cherokee rattle is a lovely piece, as is the violin that Ted purchased in Juarez, Mexico in 1966. We could keep going, but we won't. On this slide are a few of the additional collections that Allison and I know have materials at both our museum and the ATM. We suspect that there are many, many others, and we will keep you apprised as we work through discovering those additional ones. But if we have done our job and we have piqued your interest and you would like to get in touch with us, here is some contact information so that you can set up research appointments or make inquiries about what we have that might be useful in your own work. Thank you all so much for being here today.
Thank you, Sarah and Allison. That was wonderful. I did see in the chat that we had someone joining us all the way from Ireland, which is amazing. Welcome. What would be the best way for them to learn about the objects and materials in our collection? Is anything available online, or is it best to email y'all?
Getting things online is a slow process for a multitude of reasons. I think right now the best way would be to go ahead and give us an email. If you jumped into this presentation late, it will be on YouTube in a few weeks, so you can always kind of catch the beginning there if you joined us midway through.
And as for the ATM, a good portion of our collections have actually been digitized. So we are able in some cases to provide remote access to people who are not, in Bloomington. But again, if you have something of particular interest, emailing us is going to be the best way to kind of start that process of figuring out how we can make it accessible to you.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Christina asked if you could go back to the super curly belt instrument thing so that she can remember the name. It's a something phone. And while you're doing that, someone else, Lindsay, asked if there's a link for the Frisbee materials available.
I'm guessing that's referring to the fact that I put links to the other collections at the ATM. As Sarah mentioned, that collection is still being processed and hasn't been cataloged yet at the ATM. So we don't have an online for that yet.
Yeah, no worries. It's a slow process sometimes. Lots of things. Tina asked if some of the instruments will be displayed at the IUMAA, Sarah, at the newly renovated.
Yes, we will definitely have an entire exhibit case looking at instruments from the Silk Road. That beautiful oud that was on the title slide will be one of the instruments featured there. And a few of the others in that case are part of some of the collections that we touched on today. But we could do nothing but musical instrument exhibits for a while. It's a wonderful set of materials to work with.
Awesome. And are there any more questions for the chat before we sign off? And then Annie put her email out there to get more information for ethnomusicology, so we can reach out, or you can reach out to us, because we are also a tad busy because we're getting renovated. ATM is always busy as well, so we will try to remember, but if we forget, don't be afraid to nudge us. Well, I think that's everything. Thank you again, Sarah and Allison. This was absolutely wonderful. As I said at the beginning, Coffee and Curators is an ongoing event, and our next one will be August 18th, and it'll be about copper sourcing thousands of years ago. It'll be an archaeology presentation. Oh, but before we go, there are a couple more questions. Earl asked how the curly horn was made. Do y'all happen to know?
This is something that I have a tiny bit of knowledge on, not enough. I'm trying to gesture at the screen and then realizing that you can't actually see that. If you look very closely at the top curve of the instrument there, you can see a small seam. And if you look at a couple of other segments, you can see some small seams. So it's my understanding that it's made in sections and then put together. We, to the best of my knowledge, have not ever tried to take it apart to see if it's like, I was a clarinet player, and of course you take your clarinet apart every day when you put it away. But I suspect that this is more like a trumpet, where you take certain parts off at times, but you largely leave it together. But it's a tube made out of segments.
Thank you. And Tina was wondering if any of these instruments could be played.
Oh, once they come into our collection, they become artifacts and don't get played very often. We have had some instruments be very closely scrutinized by instrument makers, and they've made their own versions. The box lyre from Estonia is one that has been examined by multiple instrument makers so that they could take measurements and note wood types and all of that so that they could make new ones.
Yeah. And this is kind of the beauty of the ATM collection, because even though we can't play it, we can still hear like how they sound and when they were played, right?
And that was one of the things when Sarah and I first kind of started brainstorming and starting these discussions. And of course, you know, when you do outreach and you're an academic institution, you're always thinking of another project that can be done. But I was like, oh man, wouldn't it be cool if there was like some kind of like website where you could have the picture of the instrument from, you know, the museum, and then link to a little audio clip from like an ATM recording. And I think that would be so unbelievably cool, and like a cool teaching and demonstration platform. But it takes a lot of time, and that's kind of many steps down the line when you're able to get someone in that is interested in doing that collaborative research.
Yes. So if somebody's interested, reach out, right?
Definitely.
All right. All right. I don't see any more questions coming through on the chat, and we have run a smidgen over. So I would just again like to thank everybody for coming, and I hope you have a wonderful day. And thanks again. Join us next month for our next one.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for letting me come and co-present on your series today.
Anytime. Thank you for being here.